Corrado Jr. Soprano is routinely dismissed as a cranky anachronism, an insecure relic whose chief talent is sulking in well-tailored disappointment. Convenient, certainly. It spares the audience the discomfort of admitting that the so-called old man is frequently the only one doing competent risk assessment, while everyone else auditions for the role of catastrophic impulse. Start with the early violence that polite viewers like to label pettiness. Hitting Brendan Filone is not a random tantrum. It is boundary enforcement in a business where boundaries are the only substitute for law. And the instinct to want Christopher Moltisanti handled is not some irrational vendetta. It is a straightforward reaction to a volatile subordinate who telegraphs danger from the beginning. Christopher is identified early as a drug-compromised loose cannon, useful with a gun, unreliable everywhere else. Yet it takes Tony years to admit what was visible from the start. Addiction is not an issue, it is leverage waiting to be applied by anyone with a badge and patience. Next, address the supposed moral scandal of Junior's hostility toward Tony in Season 1, because it is rarely discussed in operational terms. Tony runs side deals with other captains, holds private meetings, and quietly builds a parallel command structure, while Junior wears the title and absorbs the heat. In any hierarchical enterprise, criminal or corporate, this is insubordination at best and the beginnings of a revolt at worst. The hypocrisy is almost elegant. Later, Tony would treat exactly that behavior as a capital offense, punishing or neutralizing anyone he suspects of skimming influence, money, or loyalty away from his authority. The rules never change, only the person insisting on them does. Junior's point is simple. Undermining a boss is grounds for execution by the standards of their world, and pretending it is merely ambition is the kind of romanticism that gets people buried. Then there is Junior's read on organizational culture, which Tony dismisses until the consequences arrive with invoices and funerals. Putting Gigi Sistone in charge of the Aprile crew is framed as decisive management, but Junior calls it correctly. The Aprile crew will see him as an outsider imposed to spy on them. Ralph Cifaretto eventually states the same thing in cruder terms, because subtlety has never been his brand. The result is predictable: resentment, friction, non-stop political sabotage, and the kind of stress that turns management into a health hazard. Gigi, one of the more solid, loyal, no-nonsense men available, dies under the strain of babysitting Ralph's chaos and the crew's hostility, which is a remarkably high price to pay for the privilege of sending a message. Junior also anticipates the larger strategic threat Christopher represents. His warning in Season 4, comparing heroin addiction to a disease that spreads risk into everything it touches, isn't poetic, it's correct. Addiction compromises judgment, creates blackmail, and invites law enforcement to stop hunting for evidence and start waiting for desperation. Killing Christopher at that point is presented as the prudent move. Remove a predictable liability before he is used against the family. It also produces an unspoken collateral benefit that Tony never seems capable of valuing until it is too late. Severing Christopher would sever Adriana's tether to the organization, potentially sparing her from becoming a pressure point, a target, and ultimately a casualty. Tony eventually reaches the same conclusion in his own way. After years of denial, indulgence, and paternal sentimentality, by killing Christopher himself when the liability becomes impossible to ignore. Junior was not right because he was kinder. He was right because he was clearer. The same clarity applies to Junior's assessment of Tony's temperament when weighing Tony against Richie Aprile. Tony is described as impulsive, selfish, and locked inside his own head. That is not an insult. It is a forecast, and the series spends years validating it. Tony's impulsivity destroys high-earning assets, most famously when he kills Ralph, one of the family's biggest earners, in a private eruption of rage dressed up as moral outrage. His impulsive violence toward Coco nearly triggers war. His pride and selfishness push the family to the brink over Tony Blundetto, as Tony clings to personal loyalty while ignoring predictable blowback. His unresolved psychological needs lead him to overpromote and overtrust Tony B, despite knowing, somewhere under the self-mythology, that Tony B is a threat. And the locked-up quality, Tony's habit of turning every decision into a referendum on his ego, means he repeatedly chooses short-term emotional relief over long-term organizational stability. None of that is mysterious. It is simply ugly to admit because the narrative spends so much time asking for sympathy. Even Junior's people see what Tony's people refuse to confront. Mikey Palmise, hardly a gentle diagnostician, suggests early that if there is a leak, it is in Tony's crew. This proves prescient when it is revealed that Pussy is an informant. At the moment Junior and Mikey begin to suspect federal contact, Jimmy Altieri has not yet been flipped, yet the instinct is already there. Tony surrounds himself with men who are compromised, talkative, disloyal, or all three. Junior's own crew in Season 1 is by comparison painfully functional. Mikey is loyal and effective as an enforcer. The Parisi brothers, with Patsy later proving steady and dependable. Gigi, solid and disciplined. Chucky, considered enough of a threat that he is eliminated quickly. Bobby Bacala, loyal to the point of self-effacement. Plus older hands and bodyguards who understand the rules without needing them translated into motivational speeches. Tony's crew, meanwhile, features a rat, a chatterbox who skimps on kick-ups, one consistently solid operator, Silvio, and a brilliant shooter who is also a volatility factory with a drug problem. It is not difficult to see why Junior's camp looks more coherent at the outset. It is built around predictability, not personality. Junior also holds a cultural advantage Tony never fully earns: respect from old-school operators. Men like Richie Aprile and Feech Lamana do not respond to Tony's therapy-inflected authority and suburban boss aesthetic. They respond to hierarchy that resembles the one they were trained under, delivered by a man who has paid dues in a language they respect. That is why Richie essentially commits himself to Junior, pledging obedience, and why Feech, seeking a route back into relevance, approaches Junior before Tony. That is why Junior plausibly could have kept old-timers in line and used them effectively, instead of provoking them into personal vendettas and destabilizing nostalgia campaigns. It is also why Junior likely would have been treated with more baseline respect by someone like Phil Leotardo. Junior is of the older generation, and in their world, that still matters, even when everyone pretends it doesn't. Handing Tony B to New York, painful but strategically obvious, is the kind of move Junior could execute with less melodrama, because Junior's sentimentality is smaller, meaner, and therefore less operationally destructive. Yes, Junior shows greed early in his reign. Yes, he is prideful. Yes, he mistakes fear for respect and clings to slights like heirlooms. But compare the scale of his mistakes to Tony's. Junior's errors are often small-minded. Tony's are empire level, because Tony combines power with instability and calls it leadership. The prequel film's revelation that Junior ordered the hit on Dickie Moltisanti has also been treated as sacrilege, as if Junior were supposed to be a harmless uncle who only becomes dangerous when the script needs a surprise. This outrage is baffling, unless the goal is to preserve a comforting fantasy. Junior is insecure as a lifestyle. He is threatened by proximity to youth, competence, and affection, especially when that affection is directed at someone else. Dickie's bond with Tony, in particular, is tailor-made to inflame Junior. A surrogate father figure receiving the devotion Junior believes is owed to him by age, rank, and proximity. Add the petty indignities that matter to men like Junior: being laughed at, being seen as weak, being treated as an afterthought while he takes care of the family, and the motive becomes painfully consistent with his character. Junior has already demonstrated in the series that he will contemplate lethal consequences over jokes about his sexual reputation and over the humiliation of therapy. He has already demonstrated he will order violence over perceived disrespect in tone, posture, and implication. The idea that he could want Dickie removed over a pattern of disrespect and envy is not character assassination. It is character continuity. Criticism of the film can still be legitimate without turning into melodramatic mourning for a lost purity. The narrative could have used more runtime to develop the antagonism between Junior and Dickie with greater depth, rather than relying on implied history. Harold is given substantial screen time for a character who often feels like an outline rather than a fully realized presence. Casting is frequently strong, though certain portrayals drift toward caricature. Still, treating the film as an unforgivable catastrophe is a remarkably theatrical response to a project that is, at worst, uneven rather than irredeemable. The same love of reductive slogans infects the Season 1 argument about why Junior moved against Tony. It is fashionable to reduce the attempted hit to sex and psychiatry, as if Junior nearly killed his nephew because he disliked jokes. The slogan is memorable because it is reductive. The more substantial trigger is strategic. Tony's secret meetings and side arrangements with other captains, effectively running the family while Junior serves as a lightning rod for indictments and surveillance. Junior realizes he is being used. The title makes him a target, while the power is siphoned away. This recognition is visible in his later posture, an awareness that blood was used as a lullaby to keep him compliant, while the younger man consolidated authority. Some counterarguments note that Junior's indictment was unrelated to Tony's maneuvers, which is true as far as the specific charges go, but the larger point still stands. Tony's behavior created a power reality that made Junior both exposed and irrelevant, and in their world, being irrelevant is not an insult. It is a death sentence with paperwork. Tony himself tacitly acknowledges that Junior's move had a certain internal logic. The structures of their life treat leadership challenges as business, not personal betrayal, and Tony is skilled at absorbing business harm when it fits his conceptual filing system. That is precisely why Tony's relationship with Junior can be split into two tracks: professional rivalry and personal family. Once Junior's crew is dismantled and Junior becomes constrained and, at times, tactically useful, such as when he aligns against Richie, Tony can rationalize forgiveness within the professional framework. By contrast, Livia's betrayal is purely personal. Civilian motherhood weaponized against the son who spent his life trying to earn her approval. And there is no comparable business file to store it in. The debate over Tony and Junior's final scene exposes what viewers want the story to mean more than what it actually shows. One reading treats Junior as oddly at peace, memory stripped down to harmless fragments, playing catch, the vague glow of good times, the comfort of not remembering the damage he caused. Under that lens, ignorance becomes a mercy, and Tony becomes the doomed one, burdened by every consequence, every financial obligation, every funeral he ordered, every child left behind. Tony arrives seeking recognition and leaves confronted with the possibility that a person can forget the worst of themselves while he remains trapped inside a mind that remembers everything. Another reading rejects that comfort and calls it what it is, not peace, but absence. Junior is not serenely above worldly concerns. He is confused, diminished, and intermittently present. His identity flickers, moments of familiar sharpness followed by the blank drift of dementia. Tony's reaction, then, is not metaphysical despair, but a more practical wound, the loss of access to someone who once mattered, and the grotesque shock of watching a formidable mind decay into fragility. A third interpretation sharpens the emotional angle even further. Tony is fishing for proof of love from a parental figure, desperate for confirmation that the men and women who shaped him ever truly cared. He has an absent father dynamic, a mother who weaponized contempt, and an uncle who oscillated between affection and hostility before literally shooting him. Tony wants an answer that dementia will never provide, and that final absence, no validation, no clarity, no tidy reconciliation, lands as its own punishment. Across these readings, one theme persists. Tony is not suddenly purified. He may be disturbed by weakness, shaken by the spectacle of decay, and unsettled by the idea that aging out can be more humiliating than prison or death. But he remains a man who justifies his decisions as necessary. The horror is less moral guilt than existential fear. Becoming a powerless shell is worse than being a ruthless boss, because ruthlessness still feels like control. Junior's trajectory makes him a tragic figure without turning him into a saint. He ends with no money he can access, no friends he can recognize, no woman he can keep, no authority he can exercise, and no legacy he can articulate. An ending that feels especially cruel, precisely because his entire identity was built on pride, wits, and the belief that fear equals respect. That tragedy does not erase the ugliness that produced it. Junior is jealous, manipulative, status-obsessed, and quick to deploy violence when control slips. He clings to grudges as if they are assets. He routinely treats affection as weakness, and then wonders why he dies emotionally bankrupt. Yet the narrative also makes clear that stuck in old ways is not a flaw accidentally written into him. It is the point. He is an original gangster who will never have a modern redemption arc, because his function is to show what happens when identity is constructed entirely from rank and resentment. Even the Janice-Richie subplot echoes this theme with domestic packaging. Junior and Janice both flirt with Richie as a vehicle for mutiny, hoping to use him as a blunt instrument to topple Tony and deliver access to money and power. Junior to regain influence and perhaps keep lucrative schemes alive. Janice to become the boss's wife and inherit a lifestyle she believes is owed. When it becomes obvious Richie lacks the street respect and earning power to deliver, both pivot. Junior warns Tony of the plot, effectively marking Richie as disposable. Janice kills Richie and then calls Tony to clean up. Some observers insist the punch in the mouth is the decisive trigger. Others argue it merely accelerates a shift that was already coming, as Richie's weakness and financial struggle became clear. Either way, the through line is the same. Loyalty is conditional, and ambition is disguised as righteousness until the disguise becomes inconvenient. Money further clarifies the Junior-Tony contrast. Junior can plausibly sit on $1 million for trial counsel and experts because he has been earning for decades and spending like a man who distrusts pleasure. No flashy boat, no mansion, no expensive domestic ecosystem to maintain, no compulsive indulgences. He hoards cash, performs poverty as negotiation, and treats finances as nobody's business, while quietly proving he is one of the few who understood the value of restraint. Tony, by contrast, bleeds money on status, gambling, women, symbolic toys, and the constant costs of a family lifestyle, while also relying on a crew that leaks, skims, and talks. Observing their spending habits is enough to explain why one has liquidity and the other is sometimes boss in name while living close to the edge in practice. Put all of this together, and the uncomfortable conclusion remains. Junior is not admirable, but he is frequently accurate. He identifies addiction as leverage, side deals as mutiny, outsider appointments as cultural sabotage, impulsivity as asset destruction, sloppy crews as security holes, old-timer management as a distinct discipline, and disrespect as a currency that purchases violence in their world. Tony spends years arriving at the same insights by stumbling into their consequences and then calling the outcome unavoidable. Junior's greatest sin may not be that he is small, petty, and cruel, though he is all three, but that he sees the truth early and delivers it without charm, which is apparently the one unforgivable offense in a world addicted to charismatic self-deception. Subscribe.